Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. And on tonight's live edition, I am going to be airing a very special interview I did with Charlotte Thomson Iserbyt back in April 23rd of 2013, so 10 years ago. And unfortunately, we lost Charlotte about a year and a half ago. So that's why I have to air my older interviews with her, and I can't do another live interview. A lot of the older stuff that I air from years ago is because a lot of the people that I spoke to at the time and that I did these interviews with have passed away, and we have lost them. So rather than just let this knowledge go away and be lost to the sands of time, so to speak, I prefer to air these old interviews with you. So I dig them out of my archive. With Charlotte. And tonight I'm going to be airing the original interview I aired with her was the first time I interviewed her, and then I've also aired Skull and Bones interview, which I actually did after this interview that I'm going to air for you tonight. But tonight it's important for me to play this for you because this interview really lays out the agenda of what's going on with the educational system, the UN, Agenda 21, the whole New World Order agenda. We get into her book, The Illuminati. We even touch on Skull and Bones a little bit. This was a great, great interview, and I want y'all to be able to hear it. So tonight, I'm going to be airing it. So without wasting too much time, because I need to actually have as much time as I can to air the full interview and squeeze it all in, here we go. Charlotte Thomson Iserbyt on the UN Agenda 21, the New World Order takeover, charter schools, and school choice. Oh, for some reason, my computer just crashed. Oh, of course. Let me try this again for y'all. Always happens at like the most inopportune moments. Literally. Yeah, that's great. Let me do this really quick. Bring this back up. Of course, it has to do it right now. Well, I'm in the middle of doing everything. Now we're going to miss a good portion of the interview because of this stupid technical issue. Never fails, man. Oh, it never fails. Let me see. I got to bring it up here again for you. Literally, just as I press play and I bring it up for y'all, it crashes. So let's see if I can get this back up for you. I was having technical issues before we went live tonight for whatever reason, because it's super frustrating and it's irritating. And now I can't get the interview back up. Let's go. Waste more time. So annoying. Super frustrating when this stuff happens, especially when I had everything set up ready to go and look nice. And it just decides that it doesn't want to do that. Of course, now my computer is still fighting me. What the hell is going on? All right, let's try this one more time before I take my computer and take it out to the... Let me see what I can do here. All right, there you go. Let's get it to where the interview needs to start. We're almost there, folks. Sorry for the delay. But of course, technical difficulties cannot be avoided when you're going live and you're trying to live stream. So we're almost there. I gotta wait for the stupid player to get to where it was. All right, there we go. So let's move you over to here. Let's try to bring Charlotte back up for y'all. What do you say? What do you say we try to do that? All right, here we go. This is an important interview. That's why it's super important for y'all to hear this. All right. This is Charlotte Thomson Iserbyt, again, on Agenda 21, the UN, the New World Order takeover, charter schools and school choice. And this was 10 years ago. This is super important to hear because you're going to hear her talk about stuff that since we had this interview has happened. And you can clearly see with the whole jibby jab thing how they can brainwash people. So here we go. Charlotte Thomson Iserbyt.
Bill, I'm fine. I've been running around like a mad woman. So anyway, it's a pleasure doing interviews with you.
I have a bunch of things I want to pick your brain on. The last time you were on, I chatted with you about the basics of everything, how they're dumbing everybody down, the basic agenda behind everything. And now that we've covered the basics, I think we can get a little more in detail into certain things like the Heritage Foundation, Agenda 21, other things like that. So let's start off with the big elephant in the room, the number one question that I've gotten since our last interview, and not only from listeners, but from people I know who I forwarded the interview to and said, look, I know you have kids and, listen to this, make sure they're being educated properly. The number one question I get is, why are charter schools bad? And then a subtext or a sub question off of that is, and why is school choice bad? So let's start there.
Well, charter schools are very bad for one major reason. I mean, most Americans appreciate our elected form of government. If you have a local school board that's elected, you may not particularly like the school board members, but that's your fault. You better go out and get better people on there. But the correct system, our representative form of government, for which we fought the Revolutionary War, by the way, is through elected officials. And charter schools do not have elected school boards, although they are funded by your tax money at the local level. I mean, they're the same as public schools with one exception. They don't have an elected school board. They have to use the same curriculum, basically. Well, maybe not exactly the same, but they have to take the same test, right? And that tells you something because most tests are geared to what's taught. You test what you teach. And certainly nowadays with performance-based, it's all that way. But so parents and taxpayers, even taxpayers who do not have children in schools, should understand that they're paying for a government service for which they have absolutely no control over and no say if there's something they don't like about it. Or maybe the suggestion they want to make to improve it. There's no way to go to an elected board member. Now, this is not the American system. This is the Soviet council form of government. If you want to look up unelected councils or council, the word council, it's at least in older dictionaries, it says the Soviet council form of government. Unelected councils are the Soviet system. So that's my major concern about them. But because I don't want to give up our elected form of government, which could happen. I mean, if we allow the second largest entity in our country, after defense, money-wise, to be run by unelected boards, what's to keep the American people from allowing that to happen with every other elected official that they have in this country, whether it's county commissioners or your state legislators? What about the White House? I mean, look, Obama could just be in there. We couldn't get rid of him. So I just do believe that it's a slippery slope, and once that snowball, which is charter schools, sitting right on top of the mountain right now, once that's pushed off by all these people who want charter schools and starts flying down the mountain, it's going to snowball into an unelected form of government of the United States of America. That's Charlotte's opinion. They have to get that. See, they're putting in a system that is totally contrary, politically and economically. It's being put in right now by the neoconservatives, the Trotskyites. But that makes sense because Trotsky was a major communist, These people are not our friends, these Heritage Foundation types. We can get into them later, but they're not our friends. We think they are because they run with a label conservative. And you got to stop believing the labels. well, I think most of your listeners probably know the left and the right are the same at the top anyway. But, right, they are. And the definition of the same is not nice. It's not the form of government that the Constitution calls for, the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Bill of Rights. And believe it or not, it's sort of, I say it's like they're changing our system from freedom to totalitarian. However, they're not putting it in with guns and tanks and airplanes. They're putting it in with school choice. Unbelievable, isn't it? Huh? Because the goal of school choice is school to work. That's the only reason they need school choice, is to be able to train our children, not educate them. And they know that they can't possibly do that under the traditional public education system, as bad as it is. I mean, I'm no defender of the traditional system. I'm a defender of the system itself, yes. The structure, the hierarchical structure is absolutely perfect. K through 12 grades, K through 12 grades, ABCD grades, 3 principals, a superintendent, an elected board. There's nothing more beautiful than that. Now, I don't like what they've stuffed the system with, and I'm not defending a lot of the educators at the top for what they've done, destroying our children's values. It's disgusting what they've been doing, and that's why I wrote a 700-page book documenting that. But I'm not about to give up our form of economic system and our form of government. I'm not about to allow myself. I don't want to give up the free market system. It's been given up pretty much already, and substitute it with a planned economy. Nor do I want to give up our elected officials and substitute it with the Soviet Council form of government. And that's what's happening, and that is what has been planned, as I say, ever since 1934, which probably a lot further back. Where Quigley and Tragedy and Hope said, both parties met in the late 1800s, the industrialists, and said, we've got to control who runs for office. And then when we sort of pathetic little uneducated people go to the polls, we'll think we're getting what we want, but we're going to be getting, no matter who we vote for, we get the same, because the right and the left are the same. But I would say 1934 was the year that this was really what I'm talking about today, the planned economy, and the Soviet Council form of government. The planned economy mainly was planned by the Carnegie Corporation in 1934. And I have that little book, Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies, which was a Carnegie Corporation, and it calls for using the schools. It's a little book. It's at my son's website, AmericanDeception.com. You can read it yourself. So then you can at least say, after you've heard the interview, I have read the little book she referred to, and it does say we will use the schools to change America from a free market economic system to a planned socialist economy in the new order. It says it. So what we're looking at, the plans have been meticulously carried out by all presidents. I would say the worst one was probably Wilson and Roosevelt. But you know what? Really, then you end up with Eisenhower, who was absolutely a real traitor, and you keep going all the way through, and when you end up with Ronald Reagan, who was pretty much of a traitor too. I'm not so surprised, because we've had very few presidents that weren't, that didn't have this agenda. Isn't this awful?
The one thing I really can't stand, Charlotte, is the Ronald Reagan worshipping out there.
Oh, it's disgusting. You know what's interesting is these people are genius. They really know how to operate. They knew they needed to do that. They needed to create this propaganda brainwashing about Ronald Reagan being a godlike, really, Saint Ronald, certainly. They had to create that impression in order to be able to get people to accept the agenda that he himself, not the Democrats, he himself and the neoconservatives that were brought in at the time I was working in the U.S. Department of Education are responsible for every single thing that I have been talking about so far, the implementation of it, right? I'm not saying that they're responsible for what Carnegie did in 1934, but I'm saying they are responsible for the actual restructuring, perestroika, Gorbachev and all, right? The actual restructuring of our nation, economically, politically, and socially. They are responsible for that. Your listener is probably wondering what on earth I'm talking about. I don't blame them, because it takes years of being very naive, like I've been, real Pollyanna, years of looking at the stuff and believing in the cause and being a good Republican and loving Ronald Reagan. I'm just about as bad as the people now, worshiping the earth he walked on in 1978, working for him, thinking he was fantastic. So I've been there, but it takes years to get where I am now. But I can assure people that I know what I'm talking about, because once I started finding out and being sort of suspicious, I said, I've got to find the documents. And I did, and I have them. And nobody, I'll say to anybody, if I'm wrong, if you can prove me wrong, I will love you forever, because I want to be wrong. Can you imagine my wanting to have what I'm telling people today, to have it true? No, I would love to be wrong. But in 1978, when I was a Reagan supporter and very involved in the conservative movement in Washington, as well as in my own state, thinking they were all great. But, this is a little PS on the side. For people who really want to know what happened, they've got to read John McManus's book, William Buckley, Pied Piper of the Establishment. There are a lot of books that are very important that, I would tell your listeners to read, but that is the most important book to understand that it wasn't just Ronald Reagan. There's a whole slew of them, including William Buckley, who was an old, CIA agent. His whole operation with, National Review was a CIA operation. He was very close to Henry Kissinger. Whenever Kissinger got in trouble, if he ever did, now he's a big conservative speaking on, the nightly news, huh? But he was a real Soviet agent. I've got a book on that one too. But Kissinger, if he get in trouble, it might be something bad like recognizing some communist regime or causing the end of our defeat in Vietnam or whatever. So CIA, they had to set up National Review as a front. And so they get a National Review to do a good article about, don't get too upset about it. It's really important that we recognize Communist China now, because Communist China and the Soviet Union are enemies. Huh, what a joke. That's what we were told at one time, remember? And, so Buckley would write an article, so then people would say, oh, gee, well, I guess Kissinger isn't that bad after all. Mm-hmm. So that book is so important. And it who said they were former, right? But they really weren't. They were actually Trotskyites. They came out of the communist tradition. Sure, Stalin and Trotsky didn't get along. Well, they did get along quite well. When you really get into the history of Trotsky, you find out that Stalin had high regard for him. And when he banished him, he sent him off in one of the Tsar's gorgeous trains, with gilt on the seats and champagne and everything. And Trotsky went all over Europe and Eastern Europe and Turkey and everything, pushing the Bolshevik line. Then ended up in New York, right? And then then the banks gave him a pile of money to go back, and they funded the Russian Revolution, So, well, these people who were implementing school choice, the school to work agenda, the planned economy, global corporations, they are Trotskyites. And that makes sense, doesn't it? That's why I was asking questions. So little Charlotte, my eyes were just, if we were able to fall out and roll around on the floor, they would have. I said, what is Ronald Reagan doing? Why is he allowing the education method to be changed from what you know in your head to what you can do as a worker using Pavlov and Skinner? Why is he doing that? Why is he getting rid of A, B, C, D? Why is he getting rid of kindergarten through 12th grade? What's the nation at risk all about? Bringing all these major left-wing, or I could call commie change agents in to talk to us in my office and everybody else too. Nation at Risk, that great big bandwagon that most of your listeners are too young to know that was, the Hegelian dialectic. They tell everybody in 1981 the schools are so bad, and they weren't then. But they had to tell the American people, big hype. like they're doing now too, the same height in order to get school choice in.
Would you say that the charter schools are like a trap? It's like setting them up so, first off, they already control the curriculum in the public schools, and then they hype how horrible the public schools are.
Yes.
So that way, half the people that run away, the people that might be on the edge to begin with the public school education, run to these, oh, I have school choice. Instead of homeschooling, I'll go to a charter school. So they go to a charter school instead, and bam, it's the same thing.
It's very sad. And actually, the difference, I'm trying to think myself what I would do if I had to make that decision, and not really knowing what I know as much as I know. If I were a parent, it depends on how bad the public school is. I can assure you some are really, and I'm not talking about academically, they are bad academically, but the programs that they are offering our children are absolutely sick. And I think a lot of your listeners in what I'm talking about. So if I had to make a decision, what I would do is, first of all, I'd find out what is going on in my local public school. You may find out that it's not as bad as what you're hearing in the media. It may be okay. I'm a former school board member. I know what can go on at a local level pretty well. And I know that there are a lot of good teachers still there, poor things. I feel very sorry for them. But it depends on the school you're in. So you have to check it very carefully to ask certain questions. We know they have to take the federal test, but so does the charter school, because it's federally funded. But ask certain questions like, do we still have kindergarten through 12th grade? Do we still have ABCD? Do we still have art and music? We don't have individual. The minute you hear that, you know you're in trouble. That means that there's no competition. Actually, this is a Soviet system of education they're putting in. No competition.
No child left behind.
Right, no child left behind. Outcomes-based education. We used to call it Our Brains Are Empty, OBE. No competition, and Darwin teaching evolution.
What'd you call it? Our brains are empty?
Our brains are empty. We call that OBE.
I like that. I got to remember that. Well, that's basically what they're doing to the children nowadays. I've seen friends of mine who have children. I'll talk to them. And these kids, the school, the educational system was screwed up when I was in, because I'm in my late 30s. But, these kids now, they're not being taught anything, Charlotte, whatsoever. Yeah. They don't even know what 2 + 2 equals when they come out.
No, they don't. And I don't even think they know where the United States is on a map. They probably don't even know where their own state is. And, the tragedy here is that it's not their fault. We've allowed this to happen, and it was deliberate. But you have to draw the line between the major change agents, many of whom are all mentioned in my books, right? And the regular teachers. You really do, because I started out being angry with the teachers when I found out what's going on, and feeling really sorry for myself and my children and everybody else's children. And then, the more I became involved in this thing, and sometimes, when I would go up against something at the local school board, teachers would call me. They don't like to identify themselves, but they'd call and they'd say, "You're absolutely right. Don't worry. We're not going to use that book, that global education book. We're not going to use it, Mrs. Iserbyt." And so I began to realize that teachers do not go into education. It's not that big a salary or anything. They do not go into it to destroy children. I really think maybe there's 1 out of 1,000,000 who's sick, but they do not. And they have been, really talk about victimized. It's unbelievable what they've done to the teachers. And all the history of this is in my book. It was really, Alger Hiss, the communist in charge who got us into the UN, and his close associate psychiatrist, Brock Chisholm, a Canadian psychiatrist. There's a really good quote in my book. Their plans, you see, to change the schools from what you know in your head to brainwashing machines, to brainwash them for communist world government. That's basically it. And Chisholm, he said, it's in a very important speech he gave, that the teachers should be retrained as little psychiatrists. And then we got all that values clarification and all humanistic education, no God, world government, all this stuff, anything goes, situation ethics. The teachers were retrained. They had to go through that. It was called the Behavior Science Teacher Education Program, funded in 1965 under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so, interestingly enough, they fought it. I remember taking a look at one of the volumes of the Behavior Science Teacher Education Program. A friend of mine had the whole set out in Michigan. And one night after I'd been speaking there, I took a look at the first one where there were some comments from State Department of Education, superintendents, commissioners, et cetera, and local school commissioners, superintendents as well. And the men, they're mostly all men then. It was a lot better than when they were all men. Excuse me for women. They've been some of our furthest left wing commie educators have been the women in the past 20 years. Bad news. And boy, I'm going to get in trouble for that one. Anyway, the male men, I call them Save the Males. I want to have a website called Save the Males, but what's his name? The other guy. The guys. There were quite a few notes in their comments about the Behavior Science Teacher Education Program. And they said, nope, if this goes through, I'm out. This is not what education is all about. This is wrong. I'm not about to continue my career. And these were high up guys. Some of them were heads of state departments of education. And so that was when everything was changed to behavior modification, not just for the teachers, but for the students too. Performance-based. That means performance is behavior, right? Performance. Has nothing to do with what you know in your head. And so that's Pavlov. So that was when all education completely changed. Well, anyway, so I'm defending, we'll go back to the charter school thing. The parents out there who are thinking about charter schools. Now, what I'd say is, once you determine one way or the other, if your public school is really bad, you've got to do something about that, okay? You're going to choose homeschool, or you're going to go charter school, or you're going to go to a private school and have to pay still in the future, because the federal government and the tax money is going to pay for private school. Forget it. Excuse me. You know what that happens? The minute they do that, it's not private anymore, right? So, what the federal government funds, it controls. What any tax money funds, it controls. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have free education with what you want your children taught in a private school if it takes federal or state or local money. Absolutely zero. No. If that's all you remember from this interview, remember it. In other words, you're stuck. You're stuck. So you're going to put your child, you're going to look and see the public school, what you've got going in your area, and you're not going to be able to go out of state like they want to have too. They want you to be able to go out of state now too, don't they? Talk about that. You know why? Because when it's school to work, training your child for the workforce, like in Cuba or Russia or wherever, they may not have the proper training in your state. So you may have to go over the border. And you know what that means? That means that education is going to follow the child, the individual child, because otherwise you can't have funding all messed up between two states, can you? But it's going to follow the child. And that's not just Charlotte talking, that's the truth. There's going to be a certain amount of money put on your child's head for his education. If he's not particularly thought that's been determined by the school business partnerships. So anyway, we're making this decision. What are you going to do? So if it's a pretty good public school you've got there, send your child to public school. You still have an elected board. You can go, you can complain, you can get in trouble, you can be called a kook, like I was. But that's better than going to a charter school about which you know nothing, really, because they're relatively new. It may sound good. Oh, maybe they've got focus on art and music and, everything that you love and all. But there's no elected school board. So if you happen not to like the arts that your child is being exposed to, and I can assure you that could be the case, you have nobody to go to. So you're paying your tax money to both types of school. The public school in your community, which happens to be good, or the charter school. Now, if the public school isn't good, it's got all sorts of terrible curriculum, or no curriculum, no grades, no nothing, like I was talking about earlier, it's going to be just as bad as the charter school. So where are you going to go? In that case, you're probably going to have to decide to homeschool. And don't make the mistake of getting virtual curriculum on the computer, which has been paid for with tax money. If you're going to homeschool, don't think that you can get away with using any curriculum or anything that has been funded by tax money, because again, you've got the same problem. What the federal government or state or local fund, they control. Now, no less than Secretary William Bennett, he had a virtual academy, which was the computer on the, his curriculum on the computer. And it was a charter school. You see, they can have charter schools, which are just virtual software computer schools that you would use in a home. And so homeschoolers are very smart. Sometimes I really think they should give courses to all the other parents. They're very, very smart. I think these homeschoolers were just as smart as Secretary Bennett. So they asked him, they said, well, Secretary Bennett, if we take your program, your virtual academy, what test are we going to have to take? And he said, well, you'll have to take the federal test, the national assessment, which, by the way, Charlotte will tell you, is 60% politically correct. So, but he was honest enough with them. And he said, because, again, how many times do I have to repeat this? What federal government funds, the federal government controls. How many times have I said that, Popeye? That's the story on charter schools, I think. And, of course, that the reason the corporations want them, I mean, that should tell people something. Why is it that the Heritage Foundation, which has affiliates in every state in this country, and also, by the way, drafted the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country, why is it that Heritage Foundation, that the neocons and all the poor pathetic Republicans out there are funding and love and all, why are they in bed with the Rockefeller's globalist Council on Foreign Relations and the Obama administration? That's the best question to ask. How can we support anything? I don't care whether it's school choice or whatever. How can we support, ice cream that has been made by Heritage, Obama, and the CFR? I'll tell you one thing. I would consider, first of all, that might be poison.
Anything the CFR and Obama, and that's like the trifecta of evil, Charlotte.
It's amazing. It's like the devil's, isn't it? He has a tribe. The devil doesn't he have a tribe?
Yeah, he's got a three-pronged fork.
Well, I've given him 7 or 8, but anyway, if all of a sudden, you had to say, goodbye, Charlotte, you have half a second left. 10 seconds left about school choice? I'd say, look, school choice is supported by Heritage, Obama, and the CFR. Now, what's to like about that?
Yeah, right. Enough said. You don't even have to say anything else than that. And people, if you don't know, we're going to touch on the CFR in a little bit so you understand why that's bad if you don't already know. But if you take 3 separate entities that by themselves are no good, I wouldn't take any recommendation from any of these 3 entities by themselves. And all 3 of them agree on this and are pushing it. It can't be good. It just can't be good at all.
Well, it's true. And it scares me a bit that they're not stupid. I mean, that they must really figure they've got this whole thing in the bag. Because how would they dare let the American people know what I just told you? I mean, even say I'm a left-wing Democrat. I'm not even a Republican for that matter. But say I am. I really would not be happy to hear that Obama was in bed with the neoconservative Heritage Foundation. I mean, it doesn't work any way you look at it. But it's the corporations and the government. And let me point out, folks, you want to know where that came from? You know who merged the public and private sector in our country? St. Ronald, because I was the liaison with St. Ronald's White House, the president's private sector initiative. Doesn't that sound nice? And I got over there and I found out that the whole goal was to merge the public and private sector. And when you do that, the best thing you can call that is corporate fascism. But it's not our form of government. When you merge the public and private sector, you don't have any accountability. Who are you accountable to? You can't have any elected boards, really. They don't. That's not going to work. So basically what Reagan did was he changed our economic system. And then he wasn't the only one, but his buddies like Ed Meese and Caspar Weinberger, who'd been the Secretary for Health, Education, and Welfare way back, and, another big CFR guy, Caspar, they got together, and I've got a Washington Post article where they called for giving up, the free enterprise system. It just doesn't work in a global economy. So we better copy the Japanese. And so that's right. That was in the Washington Post. So we can thank them for that. And that private sector initiative set up this whole public-private stuff that we're looking at across the country now. You've got all these tax-exempt foundations involved with the public sector. You've got corporations dictating to the schools what to do. And there's no accountability. All that is why I say you're better off holding on to the public school system that at least is sticking with the rules as far as our government's form of government and an economic system.
Charlotte, local high schools around here, at least some of the local schools in Dade County Dade County, Florida, that I've seen. In fact, I drove by one earlier today because I was running errands, and while I was out and about, I happened to be driving past one, and I glanced over, and first of all, schools don't look like schools anymore. Schools already looked like they looked foreboding when I was a kid, but now they look like prisons. They've completely added things that just make them look like a prison, super high fences and walls and all this other crap. But not only that, the fence was adorned with banner ads. Huge, big vinyl banners with ads for different colleges or different further educational programs, online stuff and all this other stuff. And it was plastered from one end of the school fence to the other, all the way around the building and all the way around the property. And it was all these different ads. And I was like, holy crap, they have totally just corporatized everything. Now they literally have ads in these kids' faces while they're at school 24/7.
Oh, it's just terrible. I didn't know you were in Florida. I have a bit to say about that. First of all, I remember being sort of a student, not scholar, but researcher on regional government. Regional government is communism, and it is that I've got that out of the mouth of a sociologist who wrote an article for the Communist Daily World, in the mid 70s. His name is NAU, and you can look him up. Z is easy to remember. I think it's the only Z reference in my index in my book. He admits in this article in the Daily World that regionalism is communism. So UN Agenda 21, which is based on the structure of it, is regionalism, right? Consolidation regionalism is communism. And people have got to start calling UN Agenda 21 Sustainable Development what it is. It's communism. Now, I'm going to give Dade County credit, in quotes, for what it's done, what it did way back. It was the first, I believe, county in the United States to become compromised through consolidation and regionalism. If I recall correctly, I believe I'm correct. You can, wonderful, wonderful work. You can go on my son's website, AmericanDeception.com, and, click on, type in Don Bell, incredible writer who had a newsletter for twice a month for about 40 years, the Don Bell Report. He was a journalist during World War II and was in Japanese concentration camps for several years, and then worked on General MacArthur's staff for a while, and then came back. And I believe he had a lot of tremendous connections with CIA and our intelligence services, because the stuff that he has in all of those reports that are on my son's website, you can read them, but especially regionalism. You are going to find out the history of it, what happened, why it's bad, what it's going to do, what it's based on. Okay. So anyway, Dade County, I think was the first. I may be wrong, but I believe it was. And now you're talking about Florida. You sure are in the right state to understand what I'm talking about, I guess. How fortunate can we in Maine be when Jeb Brown, your former governor, was all involved in putting the charter schools in and all this school choice stuff with Bill Gates and everybody else. He has a little foundation, education foundation, and the gal who's running that, her name is Levesque, I think, something about the Levesque. And so she's been up to Maine several times working with our totally controlled, heritage-controlled commissioner of education, who really has nothing about real education, pushing charter schools. They co-opted our governor, who we all got elected thinking he was a conservative. So we can thank Jeb Bush for what's happening here in Maine with charter schools, because they developed, through that foundation down there in Florida, they developed legislation, like I probably came out of the American Legislative Exchange Council, which does all that canned legislation, for us to use in Maine to get charter schools in. I mean, they admit it. This has all been admitted. And then now that I found out that Florida is allowing the Chinese communists to come in and set up a charter school, I'm asking myself, I guess we're next on the list, because our governor went to China last fall. So I guess we're going to have a Chinese communist charter school here.
I didn't know that there was an Chinese communist school down here.
Yeah, they come in. The Chinese communists have come into Florida, and they've gotten permission, I think. And I'll send you the link for this.
I had no clue that they'd actually come here to Florida itself, and they actually have a communist Chinese school here. Wow.
The plans are being made now. It's all been approved, I believe. I really am not an expert on it. I do know, however, that it's very serious. And this gal that I know, Diane Capus, she has her own website. She's fantastic. And your listeners should be in touch with her. You should be in touch with her. She was terribly upset about it. I'm upset about it. I think a lot of your listeners are probably aware of the Gulen, the Islamist charter schools that are going in all over the country. So if anybody really thinks charter schools are the answer, I do believe that once this interview is over, they're probably going to, I hope, unless they really don't like their children, they're going to understand. You don't go for this. And then, look, school choice itself. You don't go for any kind of school choice that is anything other than you pay with your money, with your hard-earned money, not with any government money. There's no form of school choice that is real school choice, with the exception of what we've always had. And it's hard. I know our parents have to pay for it, but you have to pay for it, because, or else you got to get a friend down the street who's a good friend of yours who's not part of the federal government to pay for it, or you got to get grandma to pay for it. But you got to pay for it with your own money, no tax money involved.
Yeah, otherwise it's completely corrupted, because then once, like you said, once the state, county, city, any form of tax money is involved, even at the local, minutia level, then they own you. They've taken a structure, an infrastructure, and they've perverted it. And now that they control that infrastructure, unfortunately, if you take their tax money now, you have to acquiesce to their federal testing, that other garbage, which, I mean, now I've talked to teachers that, people that I knew that were teaching when I, maybe had just started teaching or had been teaching for maybe, 5 or 10 years, when I graduated, 20 some odd years ago. And now you have them, they're, senior, whatever, I guess they have seniority in the teaching community, whatever you want to call it. And they're quitting their jobs in disgust en masse. A lot of people I know people that I
yes.
respect, and I'm asking them, why are you quitting your job? You know, you loved being a teacher. Why are you quitting your job? And Charlotte, I keep getting the same answer. They keep telling me because they're not allowed to educate the children, and the
Well,
kids
they
that
aren't.
they're pumping out are morons.
They're absolutely that's performance-based. And performance-based means or outcomes or goals-based. Let's call it goals-based, okay? Goals-based. That means that the teacher has to teach to certain goals and objectives that have been determined by all the different laboratories and centers around this country over a period of at least the past 50 years. Goals-based means you teach to that goal. And you can't get around it. And if your students don't do well, you're going to be punished. You'll either not get as much salary, you won't get a promotion, or you'll get fired. And a lot are being let go now. So this is not real education. It's really dog training. You know, you answer the question properly and you get your dog biscuit. That's exactly what it is. And the teachers, they know that, and the good ones are getting out. And it's very sad, and they're not really going to need teachers like that anymore anyway. So, you know, in a way, the teachers that are getting out should realize that they're just getting out in time, you know, because then at least they're not going to have to face this stiff competition in a few years when all the teachers have gotten out, right? They're going to be able to go now and maybe get some sort of a decent job or get some more education and do something else with their life. But ultimately, all good teachers will be gone. Because the goal, and it was stated back in my own office, I sat in on a chief state school officer, their annual conference, and I took notes, and I remember this, the Secretary of Education's top man, who was talking about in the future, all children will have a computer, and we won't have any teachers anymore, and we can afford a computer for every child K through 12. That was in 1982. You know, so these things have moved relatively slowly in a way, because I think they knew there's been a lot of very silent opposition out there amongst teachers, people like myself, you probably, and we fought hard. Americans, some are dead now. A lot of Americans have fought this ugly system that I'm talking about right now that's going in for over 100 years. And we never knew we were having any victories, but this is the good part of the interview, really, Popeye. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting senile or something, and I'm trying to look at things, see some light at the end of the tunnel. But I believe that this country, our country was meant to go down in 1976, or at least 1980. Huh? That was the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And in 1976, they had a ceremony at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and they celebrated the 200th anniversary by passing out a Declaration of Interdependence, which was drafted by left-wing Professor Henry Steele Commager. And that called for world government. It called for everything I'm talking about today. And those 110 or so congressmen, U.S. congressmen, signed that thing. And I believe that there was a lawsuit or something that, you know, that calling them traitors. I don't know whatever happened with that, but I do know that the NEA, which at the top is controlled by all these people, Rockefeller and all, a lot of people don't, they just can't believe the NEA at top would be in bed with David Rockefeller. It's true. A lot of teachers don't know that, and they should know that. Nobody knows what I just told people then, a second ago, that at the top, the NEA is in bed with George Bundy, with David Rockefeller, with all the top people changing our economic and political system. Globalism. Globalists, huh? At the top. Now, the NEA at the top develops all of these wretched proposals, and you can talk about their, you know, they have their meeting, their annual meeting every year, and they have their agenda. Now, I personally, I hope that I maybe I'm just being Pollyanna again. I personally do not believe that the majority of teachers go along with that agenda at all. You know, even if they do slightly, they're not in the classroom to teach that agenda. They didn't go into education for that. So I do think that at the top, They've been very much controlled. Now, I know that the American Federation of Teachers, that gets very much less criticism than the NEA, the AFT is really involved in the school to work agenda. Al Shanker, as good an educator as he was, and I think he was a good educator, but he was really in bed with these people. He came to Bangor, Maine about 20 years ago. I still have the articles in my book. Shanker calling for the school to work agenda, public-private partnerships, all this stuff. Anyway, people who are long gone, the Don Bells of the report, the Robert Morris, the council that investigated communism in the public schools for 20 years, the Senate committee, Bella Dodd, all these great people. I've known them. They're gone. A lot of people, teachers and all that I've known that I worked with, Jean Malone and many, many others, Mary Royer. A list goes on and on and on. And for what you're doing. I mean, do you ever have any time to yourself? Thank you so much. You've hung in for so long. And I say, well, look, I'm not alone. You just know about me because I have a big mouth and I write a lot. But you have no idea the thousands of fantastic Americans who came before me that stood up, were persecuted. Really terrible things happened to them. They fought for you. And they held this train wreck that's been planned ever since the early part of the last century. By Carnegie, the little book. This train wreck was supposed to take place in 1976. And it didn't. And you know why? Because of all these people that you don't know about, or some I don't know about, these people, the media is never going to tell you you're winning. Never going to tell you that, say down in Dade County, wherever you are, you've got some activists down there who are trying to stop whatever we're talking about today. They got a little group, they're working, they're meeting, and they speak out and they get written up. They're called kooks and this and that in the paper. Little do they know that they may have won a fairly large battle. Nobody's going to tell them even. They won't even know. But the inner circle knows. You've got to understand that. You probably get discouraged and you think, whatever you're doing, get anywhere, and you're taking time away from your family and you don't want to keep doing this and everything else. But don't forget that had it not been for people just like yourself fighting this battle, going way back, much further than 1976, going way back to the beginning of the last century. Had it not been for them, we would have gone down, I think, not 1976. I think that Commager and all, they were a little bit ahead of their days, but probably 1980. But then Ronald Reagan came along, and boy, he really pushed it. He stepped on the accelerator. And I think had he not come along, we might even be in better shape right now than we are.
If it had happened the way they wanted it, my whole life, I would have grown up it wouldn't even be, I wouldn't know, the life I know now would not be what I know. I wouldn't understand freedom. I wouldn't know anything. Nothing I know today, historical wise, anything would be the way it is at all. I would have grown up in some sort of fascist dictatorship or fascist / communist / whatever dictatorship.
Absolutely. Corporatist. Absolutely. And you see, that's why I say this has just been sort of a new awakening of mine, whether it's just wishful thinking. I don't think it is. I've seen enough. I've been around long enough now to recognize the fact that they're not happy. We've slowed them down a lot. We don't know it. I don't think, you see, they're not going to tell you. Can you imagine your local paper in Dade County with, say, your parents or whatever, they're going up against UN Agenda 21. You know very well you're not going to pick up the paper over the weekend and read, local resistors to UN Agenda 21 have a victory. No, they don't want anybody to know. So whatever victories we have, sometimes we don't even know we have them. We're sort of waiting to have it advertised in the paper, huh? But we've had victories. I know that. We had a victory in, I'm thinking back now, Indianapolis, Indiana, in the 90s. They had a big conference there. It was called School Parent Partnerships. And we didn't like that idea because we don't want to go into partnership with the government. And so a few of us activists put together a flyer about why it was so bad. And we had all the documentation from the major change agents, what they want to do to our children and this and that and the family and all. And we had that. And we went to this conference and we passed out and we had something, kick the devil out, something like that. It was really quite amusing. And about 10 of us went and we passed this out. So everybody in that conference room, they'd all been paid. You know, these are government employees. And their plan was to have one of those conferences in every region of the country. Do you know they never had another conference after we did what we did? That was the end of that little project. So then they had to go back to the drawing board and figure out some other way to get the parents in bed with the government, which is the schools, right? Which this is community ed, you know, so they have all the services running through the schools lifelong. That's really, you know, I mean, community educator from Alaska told community educators in the DC area in 1973 that community education is a Chinese communist system. We have all the services, and that they have any services in communist China, I don't know. But anyway, in the United States, we still would have, and you'd have taking grandma to look at the beautiful leaves in the autumn, and you'd have the abortion clinic, and you'd have the school to work stuff. This is all going in now. You know, this is all part of the restructuring of education. Lifelong. It's the UN plan too, but the UN is communist, so what? So that's what's going in. And so when we found out about this partnership thing, because it all had to do with the community education concept I just referred to, we went up against it. And we had the documents, and it was a legal-sized piece of paper, blue, and it had a picture of the devil on it with his three-pronged fork. And we said, kick him out. We don't want to have anything to do with it, with the government, as far as our children are concerned. We're the parents. We don't want school-based clinics. We don't want you telling us how to bring up our children, blah, blah, blah. And we won. We did. We didn't know at the time, just like your people down there or in every other state, whoever's listening to this, you're not really going to know for a while. We only found out later, you know, that they didn't have any more. We blew apart their agenda to have a conference like that in every region. So you never know. Now, another example of that is when I managed to get myself fired by leaking the document project Better Education Skills Through Technology. That's another story in itself. But when I saw that grant going out to all the states to implement, the software designed by all the different education groups, going out for the children, K through 12 computer, Better Education Skills Through Technology. When I saw that, I was pretty upset, you know, obviously very upset that the government was doing this to control the curriculum. But there was something there that interested me even more, and this is getting back to federal control. And one page said, this was a draft of the project description, and it said confidential. And then it said what we can control and manipulate at the local level. And it listed the content of the program, the people involved in the task force, always these revolting unelected task forces. We got to get rid of them. I'll tell you, huh? I remember when they first came into Maine, I shook my head and said, why does the governor need a task force for everything? Why do we have elected officials? Anyway, so when I saw that really was what burned me up as a local school board member, to see that that's what they were doing out of my office in the Department of Ed. So I leaked it. I leaked it to the press, and which was good. I'm glad I did. I got fired. But it was 2 years later, getting back to this issue of our having victories that we never know about. I had no idea that what I'd done had been sort of helpful to our cause. A friend of mine, she's a researcher, she subscribes to the major education technology journal in the country. And there was an article in there that didn't mention my name, but it said that somebody in the U.S. Department of Education had leaked the major technology grant to the press. And that had set them back 2 years. That made me feel good.
That means you threw a big monkey wrench into their works.
They had the hearings, and Norman Dodd, who I happen to know, I met him in 1981 in a restaurant in Georgetown. I'll never forget it. We went to a little restaurant, and there were a couple other people too, and he was the investigator, principal investigator for the committee investigating the tax-exempt foundations. And he told me over dinner at this really nice restaurant, he told me across the table that when he went up to New York City as part of the investigation to interview the president of the Ford Foundation, Rowan Gaither, that Rowan Gaither, in response to Mr. Dodd's, questioning, said, "But Mr. Dodd, we really don't design the agenda for the schools or for the country whatsoever. We get our instructions from the White House." And that time it was President Eisenhower. As I said, a lot of people better check on him. So we get our instructions from the White House, and the instructions are that we should use our money to change America to such an extent that it can be merged with the Soviet Union. And of course, Mr. Dodd just, he told me, he said, I heard a lot in my life, and he'd worked on Wall Street for years. He understood what happened with the Depression. He really understood it. He understood the Federal Reserve. He understood a lot. He was the establishment, basically. He'd been to Andover. He went to Yale, and worked on Wall Street. So he was one of them. But he said, this is the last thing that he'd ever expected to hear.
Was he a bonesman?
No. He wasn't. He could have been, because he did know some of them. I know that he did know some of them. But so what we're looking at is the carrying out of exactly that. And of course, most Americans, and rightfully so, I can understand it, because they've been so, lied to. They say, well, how can that be? Because the Soviet Union is dead. And all I say is, well, that's what you've been told. In fact, the Cold War was the biggest phony thing that ever happened. There was no Cold War. They had to protect. Can you imagine all the lives that were lost, too? That's the most horrible part. Korea, Vietnam, all these no-win wars under the UN. We lost all of these people. And the Soviets, a Soviet general is running all the wars that we were involved in at the UN. How many people know that? Yeah, a Soviet general, at least up until 1980 he was. I haven't checked lately. So here we've got our men and women dying all over the world, and all these no-win wars with a Soviet general running them. Well, no wonder there are no-win wars, right? The way to win the war against our wonderful country is to have no-win wars, to drag us down. Militarily, financially, socially, economically, drugs, everything. And that's what they did. And so here we are merging with the Soviet Union, which is not, you don't call it Soviet Union anymore. It's a merger of all of the countries in the world who have had these agreements with the United States of America, but mainly Communist China and Russia and Soviet Union before. And I have all those agreements. And it's not like after Reagan signed the agreement with Gorbachev in 85, that the agreements didn't continue, even though the wall came down, the phony fall. They did continue. And Margaret Spellings, or whatever her name is, who worked for George Bush, I call him the second, right? King George II. She worked for him, and they had the Russians over here and the communists, the head of the Soviet Ministry of Education. They're all talking about, by the way, charter schools. Charter schools are in the Soviet Union. I've got a lot of very good research on that. But anyway, so the agenda just keeps moving forward. And I think it's really, we're just about there. But I am feeling pretty good while I sit on my couch here out in the country and with my doggie and all, talking to you, Popeye. I feel pretty good about the fact that we did hold it up, that we may be more of a problem to them right now than we realize. And I think that take the North American Union. That's a good example. You know, a few years ago, you know, we were hearing, of course, when we don't hear about things, we know they're up to no good too, but we were hearing a lot about the North American Union and all this and that, and you don't hear that much anymore because they've gone underground. Now, why do people go underground? They go underground, under the radar, because they've been having some setbacks. And they have had setbacks. I mean, they got Rosa Corey out there. I'll tell you, she's like a knight in armor, knightess in armor out there in California and going all over the country and now all over the world. Who wrote, you know, Behind the Green Mask. I mean, Rosa and others too, I want to mention, they're just great, like Michael Shaw and Kevin Eggers. And I know these people out in California who are fighting UN Agenda 21. And they have found out that regionalism is communism. And they're telling the rest of the country that. And so the country's waking up to the fact that UN Agenda 21 is nothing other than, let's call it Communist Agenda 21, because the UN is communist.
And by the way, that dovetails with the educational system again, because where does the educational system get all their guidelines from but UNESCO?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for mentioning it. I mean, talking about communists, I've got a document from way back, and it's one of those great Americans who was fighting back then that got the information. Out of 20 advisors to UNESCO in 1970, that was, 19 came from the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, communists. So UNESCO curriculum is totally communist. That's quite a shocking statistic. So how could we have anything other than a communist curriculum right now? Because as you said, this is UNESCO's curriculum. People talk about Common Core and they get all hooked up on whether the math standards are going to be strong enough. Oh, that's so pathetic. Let's talk about that a bit, okay? We don't have grades anymore. We have individual education plans. We don't have competition in the schools, no more, because it's going to school to work, and your child's going to be educated for the workforce, okay? So let's say you have a child who's very bright, and he's in 4th grade, and he has a high IQ, and he has an individual education plan, because he's going to be used too for the system. His math, he gets 100 on. He's getting in whatever they have, satisfactory or whatever they're going to call it. He's really up there. He's got the best grade he can get for the quarter. And so he comes home. He tells you that, and mommy's happy. And then the neighbor has a little boy who's same grade, not quite as bright. And he's got an individual education plan too. And he gets top marks too, right? So he comes home and says, Mommy, look, yeah, okay, so it says math. And so most mommies are happy. I would imagine that the youngster the one who wasn't all that bright is not that happy, hasn't been challenged that much. Let me explain. What we're looking at is not real learning. We're looking at applied learning. That's a big difference. With real learning, all the children, regardless, except if they're really special or something, have the same curriculum. And they get A, B, C, D, or F, right? Depending on how hard they've worked or one thing or the other, or if they're, goofing off, etc. With this system, they have individual education plans. So they don't have the same curriculum. They have what's known as applied learning. So the one who's particularly bright, he's probably been given a problem to solve or an experiment or whatever. It's very difficult in math. And he did it, so he gets A. Because that's what's expected of him, because they've tested him. Now, the other child, this is unbeknownst to the parents. They better check it. He gets an A2, but he has been required only to know how many gallons of Clorox do you need to clean the school gym floor. Now, do you understand?
Now each kid is being set up for, well, we think little Timmy is not going to be anything more than a garbage man when he gets older. So
exactly.
This is what he set up for, or in that test question, the school janitor. And you know what? They started that crap my senior year when I graduated. I graduated in 1995 from high school.
Right.
And when I graduated in 95, that was the final year they gave, it was the first year they gave the test. And it was the final year that the test wasn't mandatory and you had to take this test. And it was this test that like told you what you were going to be when you grew up. And for our class, it was just, they had us take it, but it really didn't count. It wasn't taking effect and meaning anything until the following year. But they kind of, it was their way of, fading it in for the following classes. It really wasn't about us because they didn't care about us. We were already written off. It was the next generations that they were worried about. And I remember when I took the test, Charlotte, it was like, there were guys coming out that I knew that were smart, but maybe the school didn't consider them smart because they weren't to their standards or whatever. And they were telling people, like, I'm a pretty smart guy. And they told me, you're going to be a garbage man. And I've told you this story. So when they sat us down with our guidance counselors, and my guidance counselor said, look, you should you should just drop out. Even this test you took says that you're going to be nothing more than a garbage man. You're wasting your time even going to school. So I looked at him. I said, well, not for nothing, but New York City sanitation starts off with full benefits and somewhere around like 50 to 65 G's a year. I said, that's way more than you make as a school employee. So, and he got mad as hell at me and threw me out of his office. And I was like, have a good one later.
Oh, I like that. Well, so you know what I'm talking about. But I think that many parents don't know that, and you can't expect them to because they are living with the old system that they grew up with. And they don't know that this whole thing has changed. They should know something about it when they're really not getting A, B, C, D grades anymore. But that's why I said not all schools are at that point. Along the continuum, I would say that in this great country of ours, there are probably schools that, the teachers have been resisting, the school boards have been resisting, nobody knows they've been winning wars, like I was talking about. And you may still have K through 12 and A, B, C, D in some of them. They haven't given up yet. And that's the kind of public school that you have to look for. But you have to really make sure that I'm only recommending that because you don't want to have to pay for private school, or you can't, right? If you can pay for private, but and now let me warning again, not all private schools are that wonderful. Some have been completely taken over and have been the Catholic school system. And I happen to be Catholic, but I'm not happy with what they let happen. They took federal money, for busing and all. And they took money to the extent that in the 90s, the Catholic school system had more Skinnerian outcomes-based education coming in than some of the public school systems. Because William Spady, who was the big honcho going into all the schools and pushing outcomes-based education, he must have had a contract or something with, not the Vatican, but the bishops, to bring. So you have to be very careful. Not all Catholic schools. It's never all anything for that matter. But I'm just pointing out that that's a very good example. The Catholic schools that took the money, they were completely controlled. And, but so just, you have to look carefully, and they won't like you doing that. Make sure you go in the library, look at all the books in there, if there are any left. And, what are they doing with computers? Are you going for computers? Are you like the charter schools all over the country now? I hear these horror stories. The one down in New Orleans, I've never Louisiana, right? No, Texas it is. A principal guy down there who was a friend of mine. He told me his son is a teacher in the school in Austin. And that school's been around for at least 100 years. It's in a Hispanic, and it's done a relatively good job in educating, in academics, and may not be the highest test scores in the country, but pretty good, are okay, and people happy. And so the charter school corporation that calls itself IDEA comes in and manages to get a contract signed with a local board or with the county or something, and they want to shut down this Hispanic school system, K through 12, and the parents and teachers and all had built up this wonderful library through the years, and the parents were allowed to go and have lunch with the children at noon. So IDEA comes in, and the first thing they do is they remove all the books from the library. For anybody interested in charter schools, please remember this. Removes all the books from the library, and what do they put in there? Computers. And they're computer stations, they divide the room up, and they have all little desks and the computers. Books all gone. Now, this story had a happy ending. I just found out from my friend, the principal in Texas. He said, Charlotte, you have to tell people after you tell the story, which I hope you'll tell. Evidently, there was such a controversy that they threw the charter school out. And they got their old school back. Isn't that a nice story?
We need to hear that story more often.
Yep. Well, that story should be repeated all over the country. We're looking at the changing of our economic and political system through the schools.
Yeah, it's indoctrination.
Yes, absolutely. And the changing of the focus from academics to workforce training for a planned economy. And I always quote C.S. Lewis, the great English writer. He said when training, or somebody tell former Governor Bush this, when training beats education, civilization dies. That's true. There's no excuse for this. And I've had a lot of parents who'll say to me, well, Charlotte, what's wrong with that? Our kids have got to be able to get a job, especially in this economy where there are no jobs out there anyway. And don't forget, a lot of this training has not that much to do with the skills. It has to do with brainwashing in total quality management and getting along with a group. The whole scenario in industry and all has changed now. It's the communist type, socialist, collectivist, feel good type of training that they're going to be giving your children from first grade on. Yes, they will identify whether they're going to be a janitor or a astronaut. Huh? They will identify them early on for that. But when you think school to work, if you don't see right now that the children are being trained that way, right, in the particular job skills, don't say, oh, Mrs. Iserbyt's wrong. We don't have that in the school. Well, yeah, you do, because you've got the mentality, you've got the philosophy, the collectivist philosophy. Individuals out the window. They don't want anybody who's going to stand up and say, I don't agree. It's total quality management, which Japanese management. We're going back again to, Ronald Reagan and the changing our economic system, the Japanese system. What I'm trying to say is they're changing our economic and political system through the schools, through implementing the Soviet Polytech system, the Cuban system, where the children are taken out of school at noon to the cigar factory. Ours are being taken out to view dead bodies in the funeral home. That's been going on for 30 years. That was called death ed. And they're being taken out. I saw the other day the first graders in my old town of Bath were being taken over to the credit union, a bank, to see how things work. You see, that's all part of this thing. Now, that's going on through the schools, And then our political system, that's the economic part, right? That's why we're a free country. That's why we've got more people, hundreds of millions of people have come into the United States of America, because we had this free economic and political system. That's why they came here, to get away from the failed system that is being implemented right now. They, it's interesting, Popeye, when I look at my book sales, Deliberate Dumbing Down, I sell it at Amazon, and I can see who's buying it because they list the names. And they're all the names of people, they're Americans, they're living here now, but they all end with SKI, or, they come from Eastern Europe or Russia or China. These are people who came to the United States because we had this fantastic system of freedom, upward mobility. And they don't like what they see happening right now. I would say a good 80% are the people that I just described. You've got 20% where the name's Jones, Smith, my middle name Thompson, Anglo-Saxon names. The people that came over this country first. We're all spoiled rotten. We've lived the good life, blah, 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 blah. We have no idea what it's like to live under a failed economic and political system. We're spoiled rotten. We don't know. We don't care. The ones who came over here, settled here, I don't know when, maybe 50 years ago or 40 or 10 or whatever, they know something's wrong. They want my book.
By the way, I wanted to ask you, is the hardcover original edition, do you have any copies of that left, or did you finally sell out of the remaining copies you had?
I am selling out, and as you know, it's $160, but that includes a new book as well. I include that. I include the shipping, so it comes down to about $100 after you've taken care of the shipping and all that, and which is a lot cheaper than it's being sold for Amazon. They're asking $300-400. At one point, they were asking $900 for the original, and I'm selling it for $160. There aren't very many left. I sign it for people, and I want to hold on to a few for myself. But yeah, I am, and that includes that's the hardcover signed, and that includes the new abridged, updated, smaller version, which is very handy, nice little book. That's included in the price for $160. That book usually sells for $30 itself, and then I pay the shipping. So it's a good deal, basically. And then, of course, what I like to point out, if people can't afford that, they just go to the internet. The big baby is at deliberatedumbingdown.com. It's a free download. So you can just go in there and read whatever you want. And a lot of things I've talked about today. And I love to use that download myself. Often, instead of picking up the big book and looking up, I'll go on the internet and I would just scroll all the way down to the index. And then I'll look for what I want, whatever, like Zeitlin today I talked about, the sociologist who wrote for the Communist Daily World and said that regionalism is communism. It works so well in the Soviet Union. For instance, if your listeners want to go see that, they just go and they can first of all, download Deliberate Dumbing Down, and then go down to the index, the bottom, and just look under Z. And there's only one Z. It's easy. And one item under it. And you'll see the page. And you just scroll to the page. And then you're going to see exactly what I told you, the quote. And then what's great, it's searchable. So you can cut and paste, blue the quote, then go up, and you go cut and then blue it and then cut and then paste. And then send that quote in an email to all your friends, the superintendent of schools, to everybody you want, and say, look, major thing to do is send it to all the UN Agenda 21 people. And say, did you know that regionalism is communism? And then give the quote is right in your email. Now you can do that with that download, and it's a free download. I made it free for people who just, can't possibly afford to buy the book. A lot of people want to have the book in their lap, and yeah, it's nice. I agree. It's a beautiful book. And I do sign it, and it will be worth a lot in the future, I suppose. But you get the new little book, which is great with it. That's a deal. It really is. So anyway, enough talk about my book. And then the other website, that's deliberatedumbingdown.com. The other website is americandeception.com. And that's my son's. It has so many, especially education. I mean, because I gave him, all that stuff came out of the department. There are a lot of entries on education. These are actual documents proving what's happened. And then, of course, he has very, very wonderful other stuff, political and economic stuff as well. And I do want to point out that before we close down, I think, because I'm about to lose my voice, I was talking about changing the economic and political system. We talked about the economic system, which is the school to work. It's the Soviet polytech system. There are many documents in my book proving this. There was a Professor Beck at one of the universities who received, I think, a couple of $1 million or something for doing a study on the Soviet economic system, right? Well, you don't pay $2 million to get a study done or whatever they paid him for, unless you're putting that system in. And in regard to that system, economic polytech system, I want to leave a quote for you from a Professor Boyce at the University of Georgia. And he did a book on communist education. And he was not, he was not a conservative trying to make a point or anything. He was probably quite liberal guy doing a study of communist education. And he said this, and I want parents to listen to this. Those who still think that workforce training is the way to go. I mean, my feeling is that you should have K through 12 academics, science, math, literature, Shakespeare, etc. You only have a short period of time in your life when you can get that under your belt. It helps you understand the world around you, upward mobility, that sort of thing. And that's academics. Now, Professor Boyce, in describing the Soviet system, or whatever, communist system, he said, in communist countries, this is what's going in here. Thank you, all of our corporate types and former Governor Bush and my Governor LePage and all these governors who went to the Soviet Union in 1959, right after Eisenhower signed the agreements with the Soviets. They all went over there, so they've all been involved in this for years, right? So what does Boyce say? In communist countries, they do not educate for jobs that don't exist. Now, if that's not a totalitarian system, I don't know what is. Now, say your child wants to make bicycles, has always wanted to make bicycles. You may not be pleased with his choice, but that's what he wants to do. How is he going to make bicycles if there's no training going on for the bicycles? In other words, there are no jobs out there that would, that need bicycles, no slots that would be buying the bicycles. They're not going to have training unless there's a demand. This is what you call a planned economy. And it's a total failure. But your child will not be able to be, say, your daughter wants to be a ballet dancer. She won't be able to be a ballet dancer unless they've decided that they need a certain number of ballet dancers. Maybe they've decided they don't want ever to have another ballet dancer in this country. They're tired of ballet. That's the end of her. And in a free market system, you can always find the training you want. So that's the economic side. Now, the political side is really very nasty. That is where these people, who took over the Democrats did all the damage up until 1980. They destroyed all the values clarification, all the money coming out of ESEA. They retrained the teachers as little psychiatrists. The big catalog I have of pace setters or whatever it is, it's in my son's website. Type in pace setters. It's sort of like 700 pages of absolutely nothing except values changing programs. No academics. This came out of 1965 ESEA. Democrats, they really were into this. They were into values clarification, into all the nasty stuff we fought in the 60s and 70s. Then 1980 came. They put their feet up on their desk, the Democrats, and said, okay, you Republicans can take over now. You can destroy the system and restructure it, which is exactly what has happened through what I've talked about today. Absolutely, no more grades, no more ABCD. You can graduate at 14 or 21, school to work, whatever I've talked about. So that's the restructuring that the Trotskyite neoconservatives started implementing in the 80s under Reagan and all the way through. So I say, I don't know who I dislike more. I've had to fight the Republicans more than the Democrats, really. Because the Democrats are pretty quiet about what they're doing. When they were doing it, they weren't. From 1960 on, when I was really active, fighting all of these horrible values-destroying programs, I was fighting the Democrats, yes, because we still had good Republicans who were fighting the same battle. But then we lost our party. We Republicans lost our party when the neoconservatives moved in under Reagan, and they moved in with a totally different agenda, a really Machiavellian agenda. I mean, you can see it even with the focus on war. It's the same agenda, no conscience whatsoever, zero, whether it's bombing or whether it's not allowing your child to have upward mobility. It's just no conscience.
And they're taking it out of the children, too, because now you have things like this rape case in Ohio where these kids, a bunch of these football kids were all sitting around in a house partying, and they're in one room while they know two of their peers are raping one of their female peers in the next room, and they're on their cell phone video of it where they're joking about it, and they're all drunk, and you hear people in the background debating, going, well, they're raping her, that's wrong. But even though they're debating it, nobody's actually getting up and physically intervening. So you can see that they've already, they're tainting the morals of the youth. Back in the day, when I was a kid, men wouldn't have allowed that to happen, and you were taught to not let something like that happen. And if you were in the vicinity of something like that happening, you do everything you can to stop it. And here you have now, these kids did nothing. So you can see that they're tainting the youth, and that's what they want to keep doing. And it's not only done through the media, or it's not only done through the educational system, but it's also done through media and other ways of mass manipulation. And, a lot of people will say, well, how do they get away with it politically? How do they, how is it that the Democrats and the Republicans, and I don't understand, how are they not arguing? I thought, because one, they're all on the same team, and right. Two, a lot of these people are controlled through backdoor organizations. Secret society groups like Skull and Bones. That's why I mentioned the Bonesmen before, or even Council on Foreign Relations, which is evil to the core.
No, absolutely. They're and they must be, they're being paid off. It's not possible to have such a high percentage of. Look, let's take Senator DeMint. Now, I really thought he was good. I mean, he seemed to be a really good senator and maybe presidential material. Well, what on earth is he doing in South Carolina, giving up his Senate seat to go work for the neoconservative Trotskyite Heritage Foundation to put in school choice? You knew that he's done that, didn't you?
Yeah, recently he left.
Well, what on earth is he doing? This is what you're talking about. See, what has anybody asked him? Do you give up a United States Senate seat that is just usually very hard fought for? And certainly he seemed to have very good credentials and be a good man. And his constituents worked hard to get him in. You don't get a Senate seat easily. Why is he leaving to go work for this foundation that drafted the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has destroyed our whole job base in this country, and which supports school choice, which is the Soviet system? This is what gets me. I mean, how can you ever be I've been so naive through many, many years, and I'm disgusted with myself.
I don't think you should beat up on yourself too much, Char, because first of all, you've uncovered a ton of information, and two, look, everybody, whether they like it or not, gets duped. I've even gotten duped by people that, I thought were maybe this person's the real deal, and then, going on down the line, they weren't. And you know what? It just proves what you've been saying all along. It just verifies it. It takes everything that you said and it verifies it, because here you've been saying, look, these both sides are on the same team. There's a lot of fake conservatives out there. Stop buying into these people that are pretending to be on your side. They are not. And when people go, Charlotte, like the conservatives, oh, Charlotte, stop it, stop, what's wrong with you, whatever the way they dismiss you. And then here you have, look, I'm going to give up my seat and I'm going to go work for the Heritage Foundation. And people have no idea, because they look at it at an outer level, right? The cover. Oh, it's this conservative group and blah, blah, blah. They're horrible. I mean, once you realize that they helped write, or they created NAFTA, they wrote NAFTA. I mean, what more do you need to know? NAFTA, GATT, and does anybody understand the North American Union? Does anybody understand the merging of nations and the merging of all these unions together into one world, global controlled government? I mean, it's not that hard to comprehend.
Well, the two facts that people would just remember, a lot to remember in this conversation, but that the Heritage Foundation, Richard Allen came over from Reagan's White House. He was fired because he accepted a watch from the Japanese. And he went over to the Heritage Foundation and he wrote the North American Free Trade Agreement. And now that's not Charlotte saying that. That was in a newsletter that Edward Fulner, the president of the Heritage Foundation, signed off on. He was so proud of the fact that the Heritage Foundation drafted NAFTA. So that is a fact. Now, when this system that I'm talking about goes in, not only are the private schools going to go down the tubes, true private schools, because they can't compete with the other private schools that are taking money. You understand that? I hope people understand that. How can they compete? They're going to be asking taxpayers to pay out of their own pocket, the true private schools. And then the other phony private schools, choice schools, are going to be free. So how can the true private schools stay in business? That's why I say, and I've got my bumper sticker, which we haven't mentioned, my fault, school choice / charters will kill private education. And if people want any of those bumper stickers, they can contact me. And you have my address and everything, don't you? I think. I can tell them at the end of the thing what to send money there, blah, blah. But now, that is the education end of it. That's the destruction of the private sector in education. Now, let's talk about the destruction of the private sector on Main Street. Now, what about the guy who has, he's an entrepreneur, he started his own business. He's never taken money from the federal government at all. He doesn't believe in that. He wants to be on his own. And he's selling shoes. And the guy down the street, he's selling shoes. But he's decided to go in on this school business partnership thing and to hire students to come in, to work on making shoes or whatever. So he's getting money to be part of the partnership. He's going to make a lot of money out of that, isn't he? He's going to put the guy down the street, other one who's got his shoes, selling shoes, out of business. Think of it. Think about it. That is what you call corporate fascism, socialism, communism. Our country has never had an ism form of government or economy. We're not an ism type of country. We really aren't.
And a lot of people are baffled. There's a lot of young people that they think communism, they're like romanced by these fantastical myths about it. And yep. I'm gonna repeat a quote from Mao Zedong, okay? And yep. This guy was 110% communist. You cannot deny it. This is what he had to say about communism. And I quote, "Communism is not love. Communism is a hammer which we must use to crush the enemy." I'll repeat that. Communism is not love. Communism is a hammer which we use to crush the enemy. One more time, just in case the listeners aren't sure, because they didn't quite get it. Communism is not love. Communism is a hammer which we use to crush the enemy. Mao Zedong. Any questions?
Good. You should say it over, and I'm glad. I mean, it's pathetic, but you can't blame them. I mean, we have all these Marxist professors. You know, the Marxist professor in New Jersey, I know you've heard about him a couple of months ago.
The city where he teaches is around the area where I grew up. And when I saw that, I about fell out of my desk chair. I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. Stalin was a good guy. These people are, it's all propaganda. Really?
He never killed anybody.
Yeah, it's all lies. Okay.
I mean, it's just, it's beyond belief.
I could debate that real simple by just saying, look, you know what? Okay, well, history has proven, and this isn't propaganda, he killed off all the white Russians. And for people that don't understand, I don't mean white skin. White Russians, right, meaning the educated, right, people. So that but by the time that they were done, they had nobody left to do anything. I mean, they actually had to pull somebody out of one of the gulags to pull a tooth one time because they didn't have any dentists. Because they were all rounded up and either dead or in prison, and that's how insane this type of thinking is.
You wonder if that was a joke, that professor from Montclair or wherever he was from. I just couldn't believe it. That, I mean, Trotsky alone, who we've got the neocons, the Trotskyites. Do they know this? He was responsible for 3 million murders himself. These are the people running our country now with the Neoconservative Heritage Foundation. Fabian socialists, basically, they're much smarter now. They got smart, right? And, do it slowly. But what I'm saying is that the loss of our political and economic system, we've talked about the economic one through the schools with school choice and more. Now, the political system is the loss of our elections. We will not be allowed. We will not have elected officials anymore. We will have the council form of government, which is the Soviet system. Now, all of that is coming through. It's sort of like motherhood and apple pie, doesn't it? I mean, through school choice. Would anybody ever dream that those lovely words, school choice, could represent the end of our political and our free political and economic system? It is. That's what it's being used to do.
And all you have to do is sit down and look at the kids that are coming out of the schools today, the younger generations, and look at how they talk or what their morals are, or how they treat each other, or how they treat the older generations. And once you look at that, and a lot of people go, yeah, it's disgusting, it's out of control. Okay, well then think about this. They're going to be the ones in charge when we're old, when my generation's old. Okay, when I'm in my 70s and 80s, these are going to be the people that are running this country. And look how moralless and soulless almost some of them are. And I don't want to say soulless because I think every living thing has that energy, or whatever you want to call it, in it. But let's say they've lost their connection to it, their humanity. So they've lost their connection to humanity, or completely moralist. Like I brought up with the case with these young kids in Ohio earlier. They are hammering the younger generations because they don't think about my generations. A lot of people misunderstand this. They're like, well, they're not in charge already, because they weren't going after my generation. We were the testing field. Okay. Yep. The generations they really wanted to change were the people that are 20 years younger than me. And those are the ones that they're targeting hardcore now, because they've perfected it over the past 15, 20 years.
Yes. I mean, you're absolutely correct. And you see, you've seen it. I have a son who got out in, he's 44, he's 39, 5 years. And he's sad when he graduated. Mom, this is the last graduating class that really has any character and personality, who hasn't had it, will not have had it destroyed. And at that time, they had softened up the system with all the value stuff, so that the kids didn't know right from wrong or anything. They'd done whatever they could with it. They weren't that successful, but they'd soften it up, and then they were putting in the, really, we're looking at the 80s, that's right, when I talk about going into the Department of Ed, those programs continued with the values destruction, but then it was, then we're going to be hardline. We're going to put the police in the schools. We're going to take away art and music. We're going to restrict the time they have for sports. So all this, like a dictatorship. Then they started bringing military into the schools, started bringing corporate people into the schools. The school that you knew and that my son knew was a thing of the past. And it's interesting. And so what's happened is these children, it's so sad because they didn't have to turn out this way. What they did with them, the way they were treated like animals, treated like they had no right to have an opinion or one thing or the other. That's what happened after my son got out. And he talks about it often. And the children coming through after he left, whenever it was, you know the date better than I, were going to be completely controlled, and they're not going to like it. They're going to rebel. And they're not going to be taught what they want to be taught. And they weren't. They put in all this garbage curriculum. And I just want to ask you, how would any one of us, myself included, I don't know how I would react to a curriculum like that. First of all, it's presupposing that you just haven't got a brain, you don't have a soul, you don't have a conscience, you don't have anything. That's how they've been treated. Total disrespect. This has been going on for about 20 years in American public education, at least. And so here we're wondering about Newtown, Connecticut and Columbine. Well, I think the younger generation, they're tragic. But we let this happen to them. We didn't have any respect for them as human beings, did we? No, we didn't. We subjected them to these horrible programs, showing them dead bodies at the funeral home, teaching them that there's no right, no wrong, giving them good grades when they know they didn't get a good grade. Huh? No, we did something awful to these children.
I agree. And then with all the drugs that they put these kids on top of it.
That's right. Absolutely.
When I was a kid, they started peddling Ritalin.
I just feel that it's terrible that we have allowed, our tax money has paid for these traitors to destroy not only our country, but our wonderful children. And they really are traitors. And when I was in Washington we had the hearings, public hearings, in 10 regions for the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. And that was the Hatch Amendment, we called it, when we found out about all these wretched, destructive programs that were being funded by my old office. And so I sort of spearheaded that movement, and each region had a hearing. And I went to the hearing. These were U.S. Department of Education hearings that we got. We wanted to have regulations to enforce the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, because without regulations, they weren't enforcing anything. Even though we have regulations now, they're still not doing it. They lie and lie and lie. But talking about, yes, I got up and I spoke with a microphone right in the Department of Ed, and my talk, and I just said that these change agents who have been involved, and I have all the documents on there, you see, all their plans and everything. I know what they want, who have been involved in the destruction of our children, their morals, their values, their lives. They should all, instead of paying them our tax money to do what they've done, they should be in jail. And I said, I was in Washington, D.C., and I said, you could have an African-American, who's on drugs or something because I used to live down there in Morgan Adams or Adams Morgan or whatever, and he gets picked up by the police because he's stolen a TV. To pay for drugs. He could sell it to pay for drugs. And he ends up going to jail for 5 years. And these change agents who we are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars For how long now? For 50, 60 years, we've been paying these people to destroy our children? And we keep paying them to do that? I mean, really, Popeye? Do you understand why I get upset? I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. They should be in jail. Well, you know, I said it at a public hearing, and I mean it more and more and more because they're still doing it.
They're mentally damaging young children by teaching them how not to think. They're literally not teaching them to think at all. They're teaching them to react, to rewards and treats. What is it called?
Right.
Incentive-based training. Good seal. Good. I always say it's like trained seals. Good trained seal. Art, and they throw them the fish. That's exactly what they do now.
Oh, it's so terrible. It's so terrible to do that. And then, prior to 1980, all the programs were teaching them there's no right or wrong. If grandma's dying of cancer or something and you can't afford medicine, you go steal it. That's what you call situational ethics. No right or wrong. It was just terrible what they were teaching them. And they're still, it's a Marxist curriculum. It's a Marxist curriculum. That's what it is. And anyway, so the bumper stickers, they're 50 cents each. And they can just send me a check, for the number that you want. They're beautiful. They're big 15-inch ones, 4 inches thick. And they have a black background and white print, which is school choice / charters, and then will kill, that's all in white. And then private education is in blood red. And then it has my website and my son's website on it. But it's a beautiful bumper sticker. They're really very good. And the price is 50 cents each. That's very, very good price for a big bumper sticker like that. And so they just multiply. I don't take orders for anything less than 10, which would be $5, right? But anything over that, just let me know if they want them and I'll send them, and also add $5 for shipping to whatever the cost is. But say you get 10 of them, that's going to cost you $5 for 10? That's pretty cheap. Plus $5 for the shipping is 10.
Comes out to about $1 a piece, and you know what? That's nothing to spread the information that is on both of those websites, especially the site your son created. That thing is an immense archive. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you what. I urge you. I wholeheartedly support Charlotte. If you've ever been to federaljack.com, you all know that there's 2 banners up there, one for deliberate dumbing down and the other one for her son's website. And I'm going to tell you what, not only should you get the bumper stickers and pass them out, because people pass out bumper stickers with stupid slogans on them. Why not put something out with a little bit of educational value? But I think you should buy the original hardcover book. I'll say it again. This is really important. I push books, physical copies all the time. You are not going to be able to ever get Charlotte's book in hardcover at this price ever again. She had less than 100 when I ordered mine. So you understand, people, when I tell you to do something, it means I've done it myself already. That's why I don't practice what I don't preach what I don't practice myself. Okay. And you can ask Charlotte. She knows I ordered one of her books. I ordered one of the big ones. She gave me the little abridged version for free, and she signed my book for me. Now, do I back buying the big hardcover while she's got a few of them left? Yeah. In fact, when I bought mine, I thought it was, God sent, because I didn't even realize that she still had a few. I thought they were completely gone, and the only copies I had seen were, like you said, I'd seen them on Amazon for upwards of between $300, $600, even $900. It was ridiculous. So I was like, well, I'm never getting that book. That was on my wish list, my dream book. And then talking to you, I realized, for one of the first times I contacted you, I realized that your book, the whole hardcover, full print, or what you had left was available, and you had less than 100 of them, and I jumped right on it. And I'm going to tell people right now, you need to jump on it. If you don't, you're foolish.
All right, I'm going to pause it right there, because the end of the interview, there's only we missed about 7 minutes, but it's Charlotte and I talking about her book and her website and the bumper stickers and stuff, and then we pretty much exchanged pleasantries, and then that was it. So we didn't miss we didn't really miss any pertinent information, even with the technical issues for the first like 2 minutes in the beginning. Thanks, Windows. Anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, because I only have about a minute left. So I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight and taking the time to listen to what Charlotte had to say. I have one last interview with her that is unaired that I will be airing. I just have to actually get it all ready for air, but it is the last interview that I ever did with Charlotte. And I have never aired it, so I will be airing it as an exclusive here on KGRA, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, I know you can go check her website out. It's still up there. It's an archive, and there's a in memoriam page for her. R.I.P. Charlotte, you are missed. And I'll end the show on a positive note, because she would want that. My favorite quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.: "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." I love you all, ladies and gentlemen. I know Charlotte did very much. And I'll see you all again live next week. I'm out of here.